everyone, guys! Today we'll talk about a very iconic period in the European history, and that's Baroque to Eclecticism. We'll cover the Baroque, the Rococo, and the Neoclassicism. But before, in this video, we'll cover the historical context. So, just to make a clear idea, I divided the class, the lecture, the presentation, covering these two art history period. So Baroque and then Neoclassicism. Baroque, it's from the latest year of the 16th century to the almost 1725, and then Neoclassicism goes from the mid 18th century to the mid 19th century. The landscape we're looking at, it's still Europe. So we have to consider that Europe's geography helped it become the center of architectural innovation between the 17th and the 19th centuries. The continent's compact size, dense population, and network of navigable rivers and trade routes facilitated a rapid exchange of goods, ideas, and styles. As global exploration and colonization expanded, Europe became both a cultural exporter and importer. We see the importation of cultures from other horizons later on. And Europe was appropriating foreign motifs while refining its own traditions. This interconnectedness allowed architectural movement like Baroque, Neoclassicism, and Eclecticism to spread quickly between regions, and influenced by changing political powers and shared intellectual currents. The main cities, the protagonists of these periods, are still Rome, Paris, London, and Vienna. As you can see in the map, the borders are not the same we know today. Rome is still in the Vatican state. Meanwhile, London is in Britain, and that's a word separated from Europe, we can say. The France is almost at its most powerful moment. We'll see later with Napoleon. And then there's Vienna, which you can actually see there the fragmentation that it's going on in the center of Europe. So we said the four cities, Rome, Paris, London, and Vienna, played a pivotal role in shaping architectural discourse across these centuries. Rome remained the spiritual and stylistic capital of Catholic Europe, anchoring Baroque and religious architecture. Paris was the center of enlightenment and revolutionary design, guiding both Rococo and neoclassical trends. London, as a commercial imperial hub, reflected the ambitions of industrial modernity and Gothic revivalism. Vienna, the seat of the Habsburg Empire, balanced Catholic grandeur with later cosmopolitan eclecticism. Each city embodied broader historical forces, religion, revolution, commerce, empire that shaped European architecture's global legacy. As we can see in the photos, we can already have in mind the values that these architectural styles have as core values. We'll later see those. So, Baroque. The term Baroque will still give later on. We have to imagine the political structures to understand how the world was going on. So, Baroque architecture emerged as a direct expression of absolute monarchy, particularly in Catholic Europe. Rulers like Louis XIV and Philip IV used monumental design like Versailles and El Escorial to visually assert divine right and centralized control. These buildings were not just residences, they were instruments of propaganda designed to awe and discipline. I put here this graphic to let you understand the social interrelationships between the different classes. So we still have the nobles and the royal power, and then we have a very important part, which is the craftsmen, and another one is the merchants. So moving on, in this graphic there is no church, but we are gonna focus on that because it's very important in this period. So the church and the state. The Catholic Church was on the other great Baroque patron, using architecture to reclaim spiritual authority after the Reformation. Churches like Il Gesù and St. Peter's Basilica in Italy were designed to overwhelm the senses and renew devotion. The Baroque style, emotive, dramatic, ornate, reflected the church's mission to engage the faithful through the spectacle. This collaboration between church and state reinforced hierarchical social structures and cultural continuity. Architecture became a sacred expression of the divine order, justifying monarchic and clerical power. At the same time, the spread of Baroque to Latin America and Asia through colonialism missions linked religious architecture to imperial expansion, establishing a Eurocentric design language in global territories. So we are now starting to talk about colonialism and then imposing one's style over the others. I think this is a very important concept, that the church, something about religion, is imposing not only values and principles, but also imposing its presence through something more tangible like buildings and architecture. In fact, the Baroque style that emerged in the early 17th century was a tool both of political absolutism and Catholic revival. In the wake of the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, architecture became a weapon of persuasion, grandiose, dramatic, and emotionally charged. Monarchs like Louis XIV and Philip IV used their palaces to assert their power. Moving on, what's this Counter-Reformation? The Counter-Reformation is also known as the Catholic Reformation, was a period of Catholic revival and reform initiated in response to the Protestant Reformation, the one we saw in the last class about Martin Luther, that used his 19 theses to shake the foundation of the corrupted church. The Counter-Reformation spanned roughly from 1545 to 1648, starting the Council of Trent, which is in Italy and it's called Trento, but in that time it wasn't in Italy, and ending with the Peace of Westphalia. The Catholic Church aimed to address criticism, reaffirm its doctrines, and revitalize its spiritual life. So the doctrines are actually the thinking, right? So, moving on. The 30 Years' War. What happened? The 30 Years' War, which raged from 1618 to 1648 in Central Europe, began as a religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants. Obviously, after the Counter-Reformation, the Protestant Reformation was not happy. So, we can see here in the map the different groups, and as you can see, it's very fragmented. As the war dragged on, it became less about religion and more about control of Europe. It was one of the most devastating wars in human history, with 8 million deaths from the fighting itself, as well as the famine and the diseases that resulted from it. The 30 Years' War became just one event during what was called the General Crisis, a period of economic downturn, social unrest, disease, famine, and a war in the mid to late 17th century. So, in summary, it was a very devastating conflict in Central Europe, primarily fought within the Holy Roman Empire, with involvement from major European powers. The period from 1610 to 1715 in France, encompassing the reigns of Louis XIII and Louis XIV, was a time of significant transformation, from consolidating royal power to the height of the French absolutism and cultural influence. Louis XIII, with the aid of the Cardinal Richelieu, strengthened the monarchy and laid the groundwork for Louis XIV's reign. Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King, epitomized absolutism, oversaw a period of French dominance in Europe, marked by a cultural flourishing and extensive wars. Keep in mind Louis XIV because he is a very pivotal figure in the Baroque movement. Moving on, still on the another European country, we'll talk more about Spain. So the Spanish Empire, at its height in the 16th and 17th century, was a global power with vast territories in Europe, the Americas, and the Philippines. Remember the colonialism. And however, various factors, including economic struggles, military overextensions, and internal revolts, led to a gradual decline in the 17th century and the loss of most its American colonies in the 19th century. The scientific revolution. So, all of these historical events happened through the illuminations of the Enlightenment, the period of the Enlightenment. The 17th to the 18th century is called the period, the age of the Enlightenment. Thanks also for the scientific revolution. It was a period of major advancement in science and mathematics, particularly between, as said, 16th to 17th to 18th century. that transformed European views of nature. It marked a shift from relying on traditional authorities like Aristotle and Ptolemy to embracing observation, experimentation, and mathematical reasoning. This period saw the rise of figures like Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, and Bacon, who laid the foundation of modern science. This has to be addressed in between the civil wars, reforms, European colonial empires, because it seems so shocking that through this general crisis and run to power, people were embracing new method of thinking, a more objectical one than a more personal and religious. You it's very easy to understand that power ruled over Europe, and people used religion to silence others. So even though the scientific revolution was a big thing, it remained in a group of elite. Talking about Bacon and the Britain, we are talking about English Civil War. So the period between 1642 and 1682 in England encompasses the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution, marking a significant shift in the balance of power between the monarchy and the parliament. The English Civil War 1642-1651 saw a clash between the supporters of King Charles I and the Parliament, ultimately leading to the king's execution and the establishing of the Republic. Later, the Glorious Revolution 1688 involved the deposition of King James II and the ascension of William and Mary, solidifying Parliament supremacy and establishing a constitutional monarchy. Still in Britain, still in the English countryside, we have to address the Great Fire of London, which started on Sunday, September 2, 1666, and it was a major conflagration that devastated the medieval city of London. The fire, fueled by strong winds and dry conditions, raged for almost 5 days, destroying over 30,000 houses, 87 churches, and St. Paul's Cathedral. While only a few deaths were officially recorded, historians believe that the actual number was likely higher due to the difficulty of accounting for all the victims amidst the chaos. Returning in Spain, we have to address the War of the Spanish Succession between 1701 and 1714, and it was a major European conflict triggered by the death of the childless Spanish king Charles II in 1700. We are keeping to go from Great Britain to France to Spain, then back to England, then Spain, because I thought that it's necessary to keep a chronological order. Also, as you can imagine, and we are seeing, the European countries, the kingdoms of Europe were all interconnected, as the child of a king and a queen of a country would marry into another kingdom to keep the power of the mother kingdom intact. That's why we'll see later all the depicting of and painting of kings and queens, especially in Spain, have a very weird complex, like bone complex, because it they were marrying their cousins. It's very gross, but it was like that. Not in Italy, I promise. So, the War of the Spanish Succession. So, Spanish King Charles II, his will designating Philip, Duke of Anjou, grandson of French King Louis XIV, as his successor. Charles II was also a relative of the French kingdom, and he addressed his successor, the grandson of France. You can imagine if Spain and France power collide. This led a coalition of European powers opposing the potential unification of French and Spanish crowns. Of course, because if you put together France and Spain, they had the monopoly of a lot of roads and commerce. So of course European powers were opposing. But we are now starting to go to the Rococo period. Rococo evolved in a world still ruled by monarchs, but increasingly shaped by aristocrats, culture, and global trade. After Louis XIV's death, remember the Sun King, French nobles turned to elegant salons and private residences filled with light, curve, and exotic decoration. Unlike Baroque's taste, grandeur, Rococo was more intimate, frivolous, and escapist. In the early years of the 17th, at the end of the reign of Louis XIV, there was a shift away from classicism and grand manner based on the art of Nicolas Poussin that had governed the art of the preceding 50 years in France towards a new style that we'll call Rococo. The Palace of Versailles, we'll see it more in depth later. Palace of Versailles, a royal chateau. Chateau is like like palace, royal palace. That was the center of political power, was abandoned by aristocracy who once again took up residence in Paris. A shift away from the monarchy towards the aristocracy characterized the art of this period. The aristocracy, only a small percentage of the population in France, owned over 90% of its wealth. We'll see later what will happen cause of it. A small indeed group that created a culture of luxury and excess that formed a stark contrast to the lives of most people in France. So colonialism aesthetic impact became visible in Rococo interiors through chinoiserie, lacquerware, and imported materials. So let's analyze this image. We can see different type of designs which are not originally from France, and this is given through the colonialism and the interchange of these interconnected world. So let's see more in depth colonialism. The Atlantic and the Asian trade routes brought silk, porcelain, and tropical woods, shaping taste and reinforcing Europe's role as a consumer and a curator of global goods. The state and the aristocracy continued to drive design, but now it's dialogue with overseas cultures and colonial wealth. It's now time to talk about the neoclassicism, but before that, we have to underline the age of enlightenment. So, the Enlightenment refined architecture as a rational and ethical practice, rejecting Rococo's excess in favor of a neoclassical clarity, remember, inspired by archaeological discoveries. Architects revived Greco-Roman forms to reflect reason, proportion, and civic virtue. Buildings were reserved educational, governmental, and public purposes, temples to progress. The excavation of Herculaneum and Pompeii in Italy, starting in 1738 and 1748 respectively, marked the beginning of a systematic archaeological exploration of these ancient Roman towns. Initially driven by treasure hunting, the early excavations were often apharisized and destructive, but they gradually were evolved into a more scientific approach, particularly with the work of Carl Weber and later Giuseppe Fiorelli. The discoveries fueled a European-wide revival of